Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, I love you.
I should hope so. That was my outro line, so I guess we're done already. We already may have spoiled it, but, you know, this film does feature some death, some Bond death, which is very on trend at the moment, for many reasons. And so we thought we'd bring someone in with, you know, such lethal cunning. And it is, maybe I've already spoiled it there, but it is, of course, the host of the Empire Film Podcast and writer for Empire Magazine, Chris Hewitt. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hello, guys. This is a very sexyful podcast, and I'm glad to be here.
You flew in first class on Little Nellie, and here you are.
I did, yeah. Clinging to the undercarriage. Just how I like to start my weekends. So I've got full double entendre already, and I'm
it's good. This is how we do it.
This is what happens when you get me talking about Bond. I've just did a 2.5 hour sports special for No Time to Die, where I went to some very dark places, and I don't quite know what happens when I talk about Bond. Something comes over me. It's very, very strange. But anyway.
I think we're about to find out some more. But I suppose I want to introduce the genesis of how I thought about having you on the show. I was actually listening to one of your episodes about Spectre.
Everyone else said no.
Yeah, last guess. Helen was busy. I don't know.
I mean, literally everyone else said no.
It was your Spectre special episode, I think, from years back, and you mentioned this week's film as one of your favourite Bonds.
Yes.
And it doesn't have a good place in my memory. So I was like, well, I think he's the man.
Yes. I will say that, so the Spectre one was recorded in 2015, would have been 2015. And the last time I had seen You Only Live Twice before revisiting it for this podcast was in 2006, whenever myself and two of my colleagues from Empire, Nick DeSimlian and Sam Toy, embarked upon a Bondathon, which I would highly unrecommend to anybody. And it's exactly what it was. It's exactly what it sounds like, which is that we decided to watch. This was just before Casino Royale was coming out, so at that point there were just 20 Bond films. So we decided to watch all 20 Bond films in a row, and a whole experience took 42 hours, and really put me off Bond for a long, long time after that. And it was quite horrible. We had a 5-minute break in between films, but then every 3 films we would take a 20-minute break. And so it meant that the Connery films were great because you had lots of energy and you were raring to go. And then the Moore films dip in quality, but also you dip in energy. I have no memory of the Brosnan years whatsoever. It was just a horror show. But I came out of that with during lifelong love of Bond, and that really tested it. But You Only Live Twice was one of the better films. I've always liked You Only Live Twice. And that was one of the better films in the Bondathon experience, perhaps because it was only the 5th one up. But it's always lodged in my memory. Yes, it is potentially problematic in certain areas. It is contentious in others, of course, but it has so many great landmark Bond moments and so much great Bond iconography in this film as well, that it is a very, very big one for me in a number of ways.
Do you remember just tracing back to the origins of being into James Bond? Where did it come from?
I think it's just part of growing up in Britain. I don't even know whether I liked James Bond. I don't think I was given a choice in liking James Bond or not liking James Bond. It was just something that happened. Here is a James Bond film. It's on TV. You're going to watch it. You're going to enjoy the James Bond. Look at this, a man in sharp suits going around the world killing people. Who wouldn't want to do that? So it was something that, honestly, growing up in Britain is something that happens. Maybe not so much now because of the way the TV works and there's so many different channels, but when I was growing up, because I'm very, very old, there were only a few channels on the telly, and Bond being on ITV on Bank Holiday Mondays was a huge, huge thing. Sometimes it'd be on Sundays as well, but I have such memories, such sharp memories of watching mainly the Roger Moore films and then the Sean Connery films as well growing up. and they'd be on ITVs on Bank Holiday Mondays. And so I don't have a recollection of watching You Only Live Twice for the first time, but I do remember things like watching Live and Let Die for the first time, and going through that very early discussion about which Bond you prefer. Is it Moore or is it Connery? Because poor old George Lazenby never really got a look in. And this was before the days whenever there was another Bond to talk about, which was, of course, Timbo Daltz. But yeah, Bond it's just always been there. It's been part of the fabric. It's part of the fabric of British culture. It's just there.
Did you ever fall out with the franchise at all? I know some people who were long-term Bond fans struggled through, say, the Brosnan era, for example, or the Dalton era. Were you always connected to it?
I think I was very lucky in that I couldn't discern quality in a Bond film for a long, long time because I was too young to. So the dreadful Moore later run. So Moore's first three are fantastic. Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, Spy Who Loved Me are top quality Bond films. Absolutely up there in any Bond top 10. After that, there's a real big drop-off. Moonraker's fine. For Your Eyes Only is ambitious and tries something different, but is ultimately quite dull. And Octopussy and A View to Kill are terrible. But I wasn't able to really tell that. So for me, they were just all Bond films. So it's not like I saw those and the scales fell from my eyes and I had some sort of Damascene conversion or whatever. So I never really had that experience. So I never really got to the point with a Bond where I was really, really hugely disappointed. The first Bond I saw License to Kill in the cinema as a teenager, but the first Bond I remember really religiously going to the cinema to see was Brosnan's run. And again, that's a bit of a spotty run, it's a patchy run. It has the all-time worst Bond film in there, which is Die Another Day. But no, I never fell out of love with the franchise until I spent 42 hours in a lobby at my work, eating nothing but KFC, drinking nothing but Coke Zero, and spending, we're all friends here, spending pretty much the last 4 or 5 hours of that on the toilet. That'll test you. That'll test you. If you can come out of that with your love of Bond intact, then you're doing well.
You didn't work Never Say Never Again or the original Casino Royale into that marathon, did you?
Evangelical. It's Eon only. I'm not going to stick Casino Royale in there. It just gets far too confusing. And Never Say Never Again. If you think Connery's wig is bad and You Only Live Twice, then come on, my God, Never Say Never Again. Never say never again to whoever came up with that hairpiece. For that, please, it's awful. So no, don't put the unofficial ones in there. And if anyone asked me now if I would do another Bondathon, no, because now there'll be 5 more movies, and No Time to Die is longer, I think, than at least 3 of the Moores put together. So you don't want to do that. 42 hours would now be closer to 60. No, that would just destroy you.
It's not something I think I could ever embark upon. I was just thinking of a comparison. It's like watching the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films, and that The Die Another Day is like the last Hobbit film. It's just an awful way to finish what could have been a nice start.
Hey.
Yeah. So you
don't defend that film, Cam.
So you've never done a Scott, you've never done a Cam, you've never done a marathon, you've never been tempted to sit down and strap yourself to a chair for 20 hours at least and not sleep and just go for it.
I've done 24-hour film festival things at independent theater houses around here, but no, I've never sat down at home and watched like a 24-hour run of anything. I've done, maybe 3 movies in a row, but that's about it at home.
Oh, amateur.
I know, right? It's embarrassing.
3 films in a row. My God.
Well, this is why you're here, Chris. You clearly have better credentials than we do.
That's it, yeah. I think I've gone insane. That's my credentials.
Well, that's all you need for this film. Speaking of Cam, we've already said it, but what are we doing?
We're doing 1967's You Only Live Twice. There you have it.
Keeping up. I thought that was Millennium for a very long time, the Robbie Williams song. I didn't see this film. I thought they stole it, but young I was.
I know.
Well, here's the letterbox.com synopsis for those keeping track. You only live twice. You only live twice. And twice is the only way to live. A mysterious spacecraft captures Russian and American space capsules and brings the 2 superpowers to the brink of war. James Bond investigates the case in Japan and comes face to face with his arch enemy, Blofeld.
Dun 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 dun.
Kill James Bond! I want to talk about that guy's voice later, but we'll get there. Chris, you said you didn't remember when you sort of first watched this. I think I first watched it as part of a marathon when I was rewatching them all, but not in a row. Sorry, Chris.
That's right. It's fine. You can watch Bond in any way you want. I'm okay with that.
I should watch it and not enjoy it. That's how I should do it.
Damn it, yeah.
Cam, do you have a story?
I remember this was one of the last of the sort of classic era Bond films before the Brosnan stuff that I ever saw. They put them all out on VHS, and I remember buying this one and going and watching it at my great aunt's house. And I was very familiar with Dr. No, Thunderball, Goldfinger, the other classic Connerys. And I remember watching this one as, the final of the classics. It was kind of like discovering an episode of a TV show that you didn't know existed. Like there was a real bonus to it. And I remember enjoying it, but also not connecting with it the way I did, say, Goldfinger.
I think that's probably fair.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, contention already.
No. All good.
Okay. Well, okay, Cam, can you swallow us up in your space capsule of knowledge? How did You Only Live Twice happen?
Right. So this was based on the later Ian Fleming novel, the finale of the Blofeld trilogy from 1964. They chose to kick off their Blofeld cinematic version with the finale from the books. The book was based on a diplomatic mission in Japan where Bond encounters a villain named Dr. Shatterhand, who he reveals to be Blofeld. And yes, so they decided to adapt this, and they recruited director Lewis Gilbert. He had done a lot of films. He'd started in the mid-40s. The only film of his I think I've seen is 1960s Sink the Bismarck, which is a pretty notable war film I did enjoy. But in 1966, he had made Alfie with Michael Caine, which was a big breakthrough, Best Picture nominee. And so he was very appealing. And he was recruited by Cubby Broccoli and said, no thanks, not that interested. And so it was finally Cubby had to win him over by saying, look, you get to play with all the biggest toys. You'll have all the budgets. You can do whatever you want. It's going to be a phenomenon. So that kind of got him on board. And so they turned to writer Sidney Boehm, who had written movies like The Big Heat and Rogue Cop, to do an outline. He had produced an outline that was similar to the book, in that it was Blofeld and Irma Bunt in a castle. There was a female Japanese spy named Chiono. And ultimately, there was a 139-page unfinished draft that came out of this that went really nowhere. His name is not on the finished product, so there you have it. They brought in Harold Jack Bloom, who had done mostly TV, but he was an Oscar nominee for 1953's The Naked Spur, which he'd written, a Jimmy Stewart Western. And he submitted a new outline that was quite similar to the finished film, minus a fear gas subplot that would have tied the whole thing together as opposed to a space race. And the castle was still in the picture, and it was going to be set on the coastline. But they went to go scout the coast for castles, for locations, and there are no castles on the coasts in Japan. So that became an issue. And along the way, they saw volcanoes, and the world was never the same.
Austin Powers had material for years.
Mm-hmm. And so, Cubby Broccoli was like, let's build a volcano. And he turned to art director Ken Adam and said, can you make a volcano? And he's like, I don't know. And he said, you've got 1 million. Do it. Well, we'll talk about the results of that. But ultimately, that's what this movie's most famous for, probably. Another notable note for this one was Lewis Gilbert, Ken Adam, cinematographer Freddie Young, and the producers were set to depart Japan and ended up staying last minute to view a ninja demonstration. The plane they would have been on ended up disintegrating over Mount Fuji, killing everyone on board. So, wow, that is pretty terrifying. Shows you the simple twist of fate there.
It's a strange alternate universe.
Mm. You only live twice, indeed.
And so, Harold Jack Bloom redid his drafts and took his notes and introduced the space program, but the producers weren't happy yet, so they shelved it. And they recruited Roald Dahl, who was the British novelist, close friend of Ian Fleming. I think we've all probably grew up reading Roald Dahl books as youngsters. Is that true?
Not hugely, actually.
No, it's not really in the schools too much here. I wasn't really handed a Roald Dahl book, I don't think.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah, like for me, it was a real standard. I read a lot of his books as a kid.
Really? I read the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, but everything else, James and the Giant Peach and the BFG and the Giant Peach and the Witches and the Giant Peach, all the Giant Peach novels, I missed all of those. Anything to do with chocolate, I was on board. Anything with peaches, no.
See, like Fantastic Mr. Fox, I recall being one of the
And the Giant
first
Peach.
novels, yeah, and the Giant Peach
Yeah.
that I read as a kid. Like that was a big novel for me. But ultimately, they brought him in. He hadn't written a lot in terms of film or TV, but he had done a couple teleplays. He did like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, for example. And he basically came in and was like, "The book's terrible, so I'm just going to look at Doctor No and try to copy that because that was pretty good."
Which is funny because this film was copied like 2 more times down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so, his draft ended up going forward, and they started casting, and they cast Akiko Wakabayashi for Kissy and Mia Hama for Aki. And there was issues along the road in that Hama was struggling really badly with English, whereas Wakabayashi was actually really picking it up. So it turned into a problem where they were going to have to lay off Mia Hama just because of the English issue. And so they ended up talking to her, and she was so, I guess, ashamed of her progress that she threatened suicide. And so they said, okay, this is a problem. So they ended up switching the roles so that the one with less dialogue would go to her. So that's why she is ultimately Kissy Suzuki in the film. Pretty crazy story, actually. And they talk about it on the documentaries on the DVD, and they don't do it with any sort of joking. Like, they are actually quite serious that they were very concerned.
Yeah.
The production itself was hell for Sean Connery. He was hounded by paparazzi. This was largely what led to him leaving the role. The producers felt so bad for him over the course of this shoot. They ended up cutting his other film he was contractually obligated to do and let him out of what would have been on Her Majesty's, just because this poor guy suffered throughout the entire shoot. So he seemed completely done with it. There was scandals along the way based on misinterpreted things he'd said, and just awful shoot for Sean Connery. The only other thing really to note was some other castings that came along the way. Eva Renzi was who they really wanted for Helga Brandt, and we covered Eva Renzi when she was in Funeral in Berlin as Samantha Steele. Turned it down, so Karen Dor got it. Also, they cast as Blofeld a Czech actor named Jan Werek, and he looked a lot like Santa Claus, and he had very poor English and was quite slow moving. So they were kind of struggling with him, but they decided to keep shooting. But about 2 weeks in, he fell ill, and they brought Donald Pleasence in. So there's a lot of twists of fate with this movie, whether you like it or not. The final product was very much based on a lot of luck and circumstance.
Ho, 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 7.
Sure.
I'm deeply sorry.
That's good.
I'm deeply sorry.
I like it.
So this one had a budget of $9.5 million. Domestically, it did $43.1 million. International, $68.5, for a worldwide total of $111.6. So it was a big hit, but it was $40 million less than Thunderball. So make of that what you will. It was number 7. Yeah, I know. It was number 7 at the year at the domestic box office, because it's tough to find top hundreds for international in this era. So it was number 7 domestically, between To Sir with Love and a film called Thoroughly Modern Millie, which I think we can say we're all huge fans of.
Thoroughly.
Who doesn't love it?
Thoroughly.
Fans.
Yeah. Top 3 for the year. Number 1 was The Graduate. Number 2 was Disney's The Jungle Book. Number 3 was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and a couple other notables. Number 13 was Casino Royale, the 1967 spoof. And number 20 was In Like Flint, the James Coburn spy film that we've covered on this podcast. So just a final note, Roald Dahl had a really good relationship with Eon, and so they ended up bringing him over to write Chitty Chitty Bang Bang the following year, and that is a hallucination of a movie. And Connery was done. This was the end of the Connery era as far as anyone knew in 1967, but we'll talk about that more in the future.
Yep, never say never again.
It's the first of these 3 I'm done with this S films.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we should probably get down to it. Chris, you're the guest.
Mm-hmm.
You are the one who inspired me to invite you on to talk about this. So I want to know, what's your opinion on You Only Live Twice now?
Well, It's a tricky one, isn't it? You only live twice, because there is so much in here that I think is really bold and ambitious and to be celebrated. And as I said earlier on, there's a lot of really great Bond iconography. You were talking there about all the happenstance that happened, that occurred during the filming of the movie, and the little ripples into pop culture. And say, for example, had that Czech actor Jan Werek, I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Had he not fallen ill, had he not been replaced by Donald Pleasence, who then decided to play Blofeld in that way with that voice, although the cat was already part of it, would Dr. Evil have turned out the same way,
Yeah.
30 years later or whatever it was? So there's all these little ripples, all these little wrinkles that it's in its own way, it's a hugely influential movie. I think it might low-key be, in a weird way, one of Connery's best, if not his best, role as Bond, or certainly film as Bond. I like a lot about, obviously, Goldfinger and From Russia with Love. It's interesting that this movie did not do as well at the box office as Thunderball, given that stuff actually happens in this film, which is not the case with Thunderball, which is the dullest Bond movie by some considerable margin. And stuff actually happens in this film, and there's great things in this movie. The arrival of Little Nellie, the idea that Q can actually get outside his workshop for once and go on the road. There's the opening with Bond, but that obviously comes back into play in License to Kill, which is, as we all know, the greatest of all the Bond films. And then there's the opening with Bond being quote unquote killed. There's the idea of there's a great sequence on a rooftop, which, because Lewis Gilbert, I know, was worrying about how you present action, and do you just basically replicate everything and leave it to the second unit, or replicate everything they did in From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. But there are great fight sequences in this. There's a fight between Bond and a big fella when he first goes to the Osato laboratory, and they have a sword fight, which turns into a bit of a brutal brawl. So there's echoes of the Robert Shaw train fight in that. There is a great sequence on a rooftop where Bond is being chased by a whole gang, huge number of gangs, a huge number of thugs, and Gilbert does this really interesting thing where he just pulls the camera back as far as he can do in a helicopter shot, and you get to see Bond running along the rooftop trying to get away from this gang of miscreants. So there's really interesting things in there. Like Blofeld's iconic. The big set at the end, the Ken Adams set, is iconic, and for my money, it's the most influential Bond lair. It's the most influential Bond bad guy lair. It knocks strips off the lair of Safin in No Time to Die. But also there are problematic elements as well. This is a movie that was almost completely shot in Japan. It is almost completely set in Japan. It is a movie that I think has the best of intentions and has his heart in the right place in terms of trying to respect and honor Japanese culture and cast Japanese actors in major supporting roles, which is almost unheard of at the time. But at the same time, you have Bond, who is this unchanging, entitled, imperialist, as Paul Greengrass said on the Empire not in the Empire podcast, but as Paul Greengrass said to me for Empire Magazine years ago, he's a right-wing imperialist fuckface who goes into Japan, and there are moments where Bond comes up against Japanese culture and butts his head against it, and there are moments that certainly now, through today's lens, can be seen, quite frankly, as problematic at best and frankly racist at worst. The first time that we meet Bond, he is in Hong Kong and he is kissing a Chinese woman, and the first line out of Sean Connery's mouth in this movie is, "Why do Chinese girls taste different than other girls?" And going, oh, really? Bond, come on, you can't say that. And then, of course, there is a moment in the movie towards, I don't know, it's about an hour in or so, where they decide, for reasons that I'm still not entirely sure why this happens, but they decide that for Bond to properly infiltrate the bad guys, that he must become a Japanese, and that is an actual quote. And so Bond undergoes light cosmetic surgery in order to make him look like a Japanese man, and which essentially means for Sean Connery just brushing his hair forward, as far as I can tell. And that in the 1960s would have been totally fine, totally acceptable. But now you shriek, you do you do this emoji, the emoji in real life, and you hope that sequence and that part of the story passes pretty damn quickly. But I still think there's a lot to be admired about this movie, and a lot that is a pinnacle in many ways for the Bond franchise.
It's kind of hard to follow that up. So, Cam?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. This is one that I've always struggled with, in that every time I watch it, it completely sucks me in off the bat. And I think if Roald Dahl is just ripping off Dr. No, I'm a big fan of Dr. No, and so I really get brought into the mystery here. I like that Connery, his Bond is going into Japan. He doesn't quite know what he's looking for, and we're following strings of contacts, meeting Henderson and just some of these quirky characters. There's like a sumo wrestler he has to meet with. Bits like that I really love, and just the entire search for what the lair is, I think really does hold up. And as Chris said, like, there's fantastic stuff along the way in terms of fight scenes and just some directorial choices that feel kind of weird for a Bond film, but actually really work.
Yeah.
Where the movie often loses me is the death of Aki, where I think this character is so dynamic, and the fact that we have this weird switch here is almost like, I don't trace all of my problems with the movie to the death of this character, but it seems to be for me where the switch is flipped, where I just find a lot of the stuff at the end, as impressive as the big lair is, I kind of feel the energy leave the movie. Like, to me, the mystery was much more interesting, and I just wonder how much of that is to do with the fact that Blofeld, incredibly iconic, and I love Donald Pleasence. I wish he'd done more Bond films, but he's only on screen for 10 minutes. He doesn't feel like a villain that's sort of looming over the whole movie in the same way Dr. No did.
I read an interview with Roald Dahl about how he wrote this, and he had certain check boxes he had to do, and one was Bond had to shag 3 women.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's why he goes from the lady in Hong Kong to then Aki, then Kissy. But I think it's sticking to that formula that holds this film back, because as Chris said, there's these great things like that shot of the rooftop fight. That's not by the Bond playbook. That's something different, and it works. Little Nellie is a bit different, and it works. But I think when it sticks to the repeat formula, this is film number 5 now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's where it starts to falter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I like the fact that they were able to think outside the box a little bit, even 5 films in, that they were able to take stylistic risks with this, and to take risks as well with the narrative. I mean, I can't imagine that too many audiences watching this in 1967 would have seen that opening and thought, oh my God, they've killed James Bond. But you never know. You never know. It's a very different era, and there might have been some people who actually went, did the full Alan Partridge, oh my God, James Bond is going to die. And, like, oh, they've killed him. They've killed him. Well, that movie's short. Well, we might as well leave. But, just even that opening with Bond being machine gunned to death and leading into the opening credits of, Nancy Sinatra singing You Only Live Twice, or Robbie Williams' Millennium, if you will. That was quite a bold choice. The stylistic, the way that Little Nellie is presented to us, which is a series of static cuts as we see Little Nellie being assembled, is kind of different and outside the playbook. So Gilbert's trying different things. I don't think he ever quite got, he directed a number of Bond movies after that, including The Spy Who Loved Me, and I don't think he ever quite got that experimental again. He was a little bit more formulaic. I mean, some cracking films later on, but a little bit more formulaic. So I quite like the fact that they were able to take risks and go for broke a little bit. And I think they knew going into it was going to be Connery's last movie because his contract was up. And I wonder if it was during the filming that he decided that he wasn't going to renew his contract or re-up. But I think they knew going in that was going to be it. And it's interesting because if you compare the idea that this was Connery's 5th and final film as James Bond, and you compare that obviously to the one we've just seen. I don't want to get into spoilers, but there are comparisons and contrasts to be drawn between this and No Time to Die, and how Connery approached his last movie as Bond, and how Daniel Craig approached his last movie as Bond.
There's also a lot of shades of Dr. No over No Time to Die as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It's interesting, when you're looking at the history of You Only Live Twice, he announced he wasn't going to do Bond again during the production. But he was already in bad terms with Saltzman and Broccoli. Like, apparently he wouldn't act when they were on set. That's not a good situation to be in. I imagine they're the producers after all. But it makes me think about Star Trek callback. I'm sorry, but the Wrath of Khan. Spock, learned Nimoy wouldn't come back unless they killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got that thing, and then they throw in that because it was common knowledge that he died in the film Wrath of Khan, I should say. So they put the fake kill at the start.
Yeah.
And so you get that with this film as well. I just thought that was a strange little comparison there.
Imagine if they had killed him at the beginning of this, and then you're just watching. I don't know. You could follow Tiger, follow Tiger, or maybe follow Henderson, because that guy, Charles Gray in that brief little cameo he does, is really interesting. I'd follow that guy, but I'm a Liverpool fan, so I'd follow anyone called Henderson.
I would watch any Tiger Tanaka film. I mean, he's an amazing ally. So yeah.
He's so great. It's like, how have we got multiple Felix Leiters, but never multiple Tiger Tanakas? What's going on there?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna chip in with my thoughts, and I'm maybe gonna poo-poo on the party just a wee bit. First time I watched this film, it was probably about 2018 in its entirety. I must have seen bits and bobs, Little Nellie clips and that as a kid, etc. Bits on bank holidays, and I saw the scene Chris alluded to, where he becomes Japanese, and in my sensibilities, I was like, oh no, and so I put it down a peg. Mm-hmm. It had such a great trajectory, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger. I'm not a great Thunderball fan, but I can see why some people like it. I don't.
I like Thunderball. I'm a fan of Thunderball.
Oh, which bit? How?
The whole movie. I talked about it on the episode, but to me, that is like kind of island time Bond. Like, if you love the world of Bond, you get to just hang out there for 2 hours, 15 minutes, and just kind of soak in the ambience.
Oh, that's because nothing happens.
But that's the beauty.
You're talking to a guy with a picture of a shark on each wall behind him right now. He likes the sharks. This is why he likes Thunderball. So we forgive him.
I mean, the underwater scenes are interminable. What's going on?
They're horrible. Oh. They are horrible. I'm sorry.
Have you seen them on the big screen?
Have I seen Thunderball on the big screen? No, I was busy that night. maybe. Do you think that would transform my Thunderball experience if it was slightly bigger?
I'm not going to say it's going to change your entire vision of what Thunderball is, but I remember going to a double feature of Thunderball and On Her Majesty's here in Vancouver, and the underwater footage feels much more immersive on the big screen than it does at home, where you've got your phone, you've got the dog, you've got kids around, you know what I mean, where your focus is much more easily shifted.
Okay.
When you are watching on the big screen, it feels like you're kind of more sucked into that sort of vibe.
Okay.
Don't you mean?
All right.
Don't you mean subversive?
I'll keep them peeled.
Sure.
I'll keep them peeled for any Thunderball big screen experiences, and I will see whether I can pop along to that, because honestly, I've tried with Thunderball. I really have over the years, but I just can't get on board with it at all. Whereas You Only Live Twice has its issues, has its problems, as we say. I mean, you're right. I mean, Christ Almighty Scott, that sequence. Because it's presented so matter-of-factly as well. The tiger just bounces along to him and goes, well, of course, you're going to have to become a Japanese. And I go, what? Why? What? How would that possibly help? What is going on?
He's already dead.
He's
technically. Who knows he's alive? Who cares?
He's been bouncing around Japan, punching everyone he meets. I don't understand how possibly going even more undercover is going to help. And it's going to set race relations between Japan and England back by decades. I don't understand what's going on here. So, yeah.
Well, and also, do we see it in any way effective? Because they're at the ninja training school, and he gets attacked by a guy with a spear. So clearly that guy was able to see through the illusion.
Yeah, I mean...
So I've never understood... Because in the book, the whole point was, like, Bond has a near-death experience, later on, and has amnesia and thinks he's a Japanese fisherman. So that's where the You Only Live Twice comes from. It's like he has two different lives there in the story. Here, though, they obviously want to work with that and instead brought in this whole thing of cosmetics. I like that they show very extensive cosmetics being applied, and then it just cuts to him with like his hair brushed forward afterwards. But I just don't understand what is the what is the goal of this? Because it's not like we see him going undercover in any areas where anyone would even be looking at him.
He doesn't go into the center of Tokyo, and he doesn't go into a Japanese restaurant and pass himself off as a Japanese person. It just all feels very ill-considered, very, very ill thought through, and pretty badly executed. But because immediately you're absolutely right. Like one of the things that happens to him after he starts going through this transformation is like someone tries to kill him again with one of the scenes that's most effective in the movie, with the poison on the line that comes down, and sadly, Mrs. Bond. Well, not Mrs. Bond, but that's only imagining Secret Service.
What's worse is it actually all washes off in the ocean.
Yeah,
it's not even good prosthetics. It doesn't hold.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. Very bad.
For me, I think this is a film of two halves. I think it's really great at the start, and as soon as Blofeld turns up with that strange voice, it just starts to take a nosedive. Little Nellie has taken a few shots and is starting to go down, unfortunately. It's as you say, it's really good at the start. How he gets killed, the fight with the guy who's actually The Rock's grandfather in the Osato lounge. That's a nice little thing there. That's all really cool. Going to Japan, seeing Japan's, it's fun. Seeing M and Moneypenny in the naval office.
Yeah,
it's nice to see them out on tour. One of the few times they get to do that. The Man with the Golden Gun's still my favourite with the sideways office, but that's all great. And then as soon as Blofeld turns up, I feel like the energy just disappears from the film, and it just slowly starts to stop being fun. And that's really what you come to these films for.
There is a little element of that in most of these Bond movies, that by the time you get to the lair, it becomes a little bit rote. But no, I like it. I like watching Bond stalk around in a series of bad disguises. And then, of course, you have Ninja Assault at the end. And who doesn't love a Ninja Assault? An all-out massive war between Blofeld's troops and Spectre's troops and Tiger Tanaka and his ninja army. And that sentence alone should be enough to catapult You Only Live Twice to the top of any respected, discerning Bond fans list.
It's really weird because I watched this and then I watched an episode of Squid Game afterwards. And I had to point out the color of the uniforms is just strangely similar.
See, the influence of You Only Live Twice, it still continues to ripple out even all these years later. You Only Live Twice is basically an early Squid Game.
I wonder if part of the problem for me was I would have loved to have seen this movie in 1967, because the problem was for me growing up, I watched the Roger Moores first. So I'd watch Lewis Gilbert's Moonraker as well as Spy Who Loved Me, which are basically just remakes of this movie, where you can really see he's perfecting his action chops, so that I had absorbed over and over again the big enemy ship invasion in Spy Who Loved Me, which is really incredible. And so when I went backwards and watched this one, look, I love the ninjas coming down the ropes into the volcano. What an amazing image. Like, there's some fantastic stuff here, but I just find the action is just not as dynamic in this film versus even some of the other Connery ones where I was more sucked into it. Here I was like, I love the idea, but I almost feel like the scale maybe intimidated Lewis Gilbert to some degree.
What are you talking about? Blofeld on the electric tram is an action highlight for me.
Oh, that's very memorable.
It's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that this movie opens with a giant spaceship eating essentially another spaceship. And this is a year before Kubrick would do 2001, A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And the effects in that opening are better, not only than the effects in 2001, A Space Odyssey, but better than any film that's been made since. So it surpasses Star Wars, surpasses Moonraker, surpasses Infinity War, anything to do with space. And this movie is the benchmark. Also, slightly more serious than that is the John Barry score is an absolute belter. But you don't need me to tell you that it's John Barry. But the capsule in space, that capsule in space cue is tremendous.
I find myself haunted by just the image of that little man on the cable.
A poor bugger.
As the doors... Yeah, as the doors are closing, and it's like, no. Every time I watch this movie, I'm like, this part for some reason bothers me, and I don't know why.
It's like that moment in Deep Impact, isn't it? When I always go to Deep Impact. When Jon Favreau is on a spacewalk and gets cut loose, and one of the last shots we see of Jon Favreau is from inside his spacesuit, and you could just hear his panicked breathing going as he floats off into space to his certain doom. And you go, "Oh, come on! You can't do that to Favs." And this poor guy, this could have been Favs' grandfather for all we know. Could run the family.
I always think of De Palma's Mission to Mars as well, where I believe it was Tim Robbins is like slowly drifting away and they can't get him back. Apparently, I really have a thing about being lost in space. This is why I'm not joining Shatner and hopping on a rocket to space.
We'd have to send a Clooney and Bullock to get him back.
Him, but not me.
Yeah.
They'll leave me.
Precisely.
I think we'll spin into sort of some of our favourite bits of the film, favourite moments, things that we liked about it. I mean, I will just say that space is way more fun than water.
Oh, them's fighting words, Scott.
Sorry, not sorry. I'd rather watch, starships docking with each other, strangely. Very phallic scenes, but I guess that's why Austin Powers went there. Then 20 minutes of scuba diving.
Well, fair. I mean, I like that we're seeing that 60s sci-fi. This is 1 year after Star Trek is on the air as well. So, and this the ship here does remind me a little of the Doomsday Machine from the episode of the same name from the original series. So I enjoy that stuff. And as great as 2001 is, and all of the sci-fi that's come since, it's really pushed the technical boundaries as to what we can achieve. I do really love watching these sort of kitschier depictions of space. Like, I just find it a lot of fun, and it's the reason I go back and watch, a lot of the old classic sci-fi films from the 50s, is that some people will point and laugh at them, but to me, there's a real vibe they give off that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. But although I would quibble with the idea of this being kitschy, this is as authentic and spot on as it gets.
True.
This is the space experience in a nutshell.
It's also belittling the tragedy of all of the astronauts we lost due to cables being cut short by, little claws.
Due to being eaten by a bigger spaceship.
Yeah.
It happened all the time.
Very insensitive of me. I apologize to all the listeners.
Yeah, this is why Apollo 13 was a lie. When they said, "Houston, we have a problem," they didn't mean that something had gone wrong inside the spaceship. It meant that they were actually being eaten by a bigger spaceship, but they can't tell you the truth. And so I'm here to tell you the truth. 5G.
Isn't it crazy that
they were eaten by 5G?
Yeah, it's a precursor to now. They were just building up their strength. It's like Pac-Man in space. Isn't it weird that in Flint came out 2 months after this, and that also features a protracted space sequence?
Yeah. Although this one's much more interesting. In Flint, you are waiting to go to space. You are like, I cannot wait to go to space, and then you get there and you're like, okay, let's roll those credits. So, yeah.
Prescient.
Well, I really wanted to see Derek Flint have sex in space, but we never got there, unfortunately.
He's attempting re-entry.
Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to getting to that one. But what about you, Chris? Something you liked?
I think I've mentioned quite a lot of the stuff I really, really liked in this. Again, I think there's some really lovely visuals in this. I like Blofeld. I like Blofeld. I think this is the gold standard. I mean, Telly Savalas played him in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, obviously. I'm going to go slightly against the grain as regards to critical consensus in that movie. I know that's beloved, and I know Steven Soderbergh loves it and thinks it pushes the envelope stylistically for Bond. But again, I'm a little bit like it's Thunderball 2.0 in that it's extraordinarily dull. It's got some good stuff going for it. If it had a better actor than Lazenby in the lead role, they might have been able to pull off the emotion of the ending. But Savalas just doesn't work as Blofeld for me. It's really interesting that Charles Gray plays him in Diamonds Are Forever. I agree with you. I would have liked to have seen Donald Pleasence play the role across all the movies, even the bit in For Your Eyes Only where I don't think they could show his face because I'm not sure they had the rights at that point, and so they basically just dump him down a giant tower, and that's it until Spectre. But Blofeld's introduction in this, where he leans forward because he's been teased for how many movies now? 4 movies. And so you finally get to see him, and with the scar and with the cat and with that voice, and that's a great moment for me.
And I mean, he's only on screen, or he only features in the movie really for about 10 minutes, where it's actually, Donald Pleasence's face. And I know that Pleasence was quite involved with the visual design. He was very interested in what they could do. The original actor they cast, it was just a guy in a beard. Like, they didn't have the whole facial prosthetic, whereas Pleasence really wanted to do that. And he regretted it almost immediately because the prosthetic was so uncomfortable and kept poking his eye that I wonder if maybe that was a factor in him not coming back, or if it was just that, I don't know. I mean, it's the 60s, right? Like, they aren't super hung up on continuity if they just want to replace him. And I also don't know that I would have bought like 6'4" Lazenby fighting like Donald Pleasence on a bobsled run. I think it might have been a little tilted in one direction. Savalas is a little beefier. But to me, the impact of what Pleasence manages to achieve in this movie is so effective. Sets a template for a lot of the real big tier Bond villains that are going to follow. And in 10 minutes just becomes one of the most iconic images in the history of the franchise. So, I mean, he's absolutely astonishing in this movie.
Yeah, he's great. Love a bit of Donald Pleasence.
Cam, anything else from you?
Yeah, I think the character of Aki is someone who really deserves a mention, and that this is a really dynamic character who brings a lot to this movie. Like, I enjoy seeing just how she is, interested in Bond, but she's also a really capable agent. And I think this is where, like, my problem with the movie is that I'm so on board with the Aki Bond dynamic. Like, I think they have genuine chemistry that when you kill her off, and I think her death scene's pretty amazing.
Yep.
If you're an actor and you have a death scene, you hope for something like this, that people are always going to remember that poison coming down the thread. But the movie loses something when she leaves. And to me, that's kind of the issue, is like, you compare Kissy to Aki, and Aki is just so much more of an interesting character. And I really am bothered by the fact that her death is like treated with really no regard whatsoever. Like, Tiger's on to the next scene joking about, the woman they're going to marry Bond off to. And it's like, Aki deserved better, because I think this character is a real high mark for the franchise at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. That is very, very fair. And, but they had the Bond formula back then, as you alluded to, the Roald Dahl thing, where apparently he said that they had to have 3 Bond women in the film, and two had to die, or 2 should die. That was the formula that was handed down to him, which is wild. And obviously the Craig Bonds have bucked against that trend. And yeah, maybe Aki could have stuck around to the end.
I think, too, you look at Joe Masterson in Goldfinger, who pops up very briefly and dies. But when you see her sister later wanting revenge, there's a sense that her life mattered, that it had ripples, just, this very minor character dying, whereas like Aki, there's no ripples whatsoever. I think maybe that also grates on it for me.
Yeah, Bond's very much business as usual. Let's just get on with it. Oh, well. Poor old Aki.
Aki also gives us like the only moment of joy that Sean Connery seems to have in this film, when he sees her during the massage.
Oh, that's cold.
Well, I have notes about his performance, but like, he sees Aki and he's Aki, and like, there's a smile on the guy's face, and I haven't seen a Bond so happy since Daniel Craig rapped on Spectre. That's
yeah.
So,
yeah, no.
That was I had that joke written down for a while. I'm sorry, I had to work it in somehow.
Home run, Scott. Home run.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to call out that I had for likes, I pointed this out as like the star performance in Thunderball, was the dog at the Junkanoo that was pissing, of course. And this film has another creature that is the star performer, and that is the cat, of course, that is trying desperately to get away from everything happening around him.
Especially near the end, when all sorts of squibs going off and explosions. If you're a cat, you're not chill about that at all, are you? You just want to get out of there. There's a guy next to you and he's got prosthetics on his face and he's talking in a weird voice. You don't want that.
You can almost guarantee they were regretting the choice of giving Blofeld a cat when it came to this movie. And they're like, look, Donald, can you just carry this cat in every scene? Because cats are not known to be the greatest actors.
Yeah. Can we give you a marmoset or something like that? What's more docile than a cat?
I think Robert Davi had it right with the lizard.
Yeah.
The lizard, absolutely. They could have drugged the cat, I guess. I mean, I'm sure that, there are all sorts of animal rights organizations would frown upon that sort of thing nowadays, but it was the 60s. It was a different time. So I'm just saying, they could have just injected the cat with heroin before the take and then just gone
They
with
were
it.
riding horses off of cliffs in 80s, so for Never Say Never Again. We could do
Yeah.
that in the 60s. Let's do it.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Have a succession of stunt cats. If the cat ODs, then so be it. Obviously,
It's got dark.
I would like to.
Okay.
I would like to point out that SpyHards does not condone injecting heroin into cats, whether it's on a movie set or not. And in fact, we strongly condemn that.
You can tune into the Empire Film Podcast if you want to hear more of that.
Yeah.
Oh no! If you love cats ODing and heroin, go to the Empire Film Podcast. I don't even know why I called it that. I called the Empire Podcast. But go to the Empire Podcast, and we will meet your cat ODing and heroin needs, big time.
And it's funny because we just covered Gotcha recently, where they dart a tiger on screen as well. So that seems to be an ongoing trend on this show. Yeah.
I don't care. The bigger the cat, the bigger the cat, the bigger the injection. That's my motto. It's what I will do.
I want to touch on just briefly the locations in this movie because, obviously the volcano lair is unbelievable, like just a masterstroke. But even just, there's a real sense of the travelogue in Japan here that Bond movies used to do a lot. It was all about the location. How do we get the most for our dollar by visiting these locations? And it's something that is a little bit lost. You look at No Time to Die, which has some great locations, but you don't get that you don't get to kind of soak in it the way you do in You Only Live Twice, which I think really does bring the entire kind of Japanese vibe just to the screen.
Yeah, I think a great part of that is because in the early days, by and large, they were happy for Bond to stay in one place, and so he goes to Japan very early in this movie, and they stay in Japan for the entire film. And yeah, there are problems, as I said earlier on, with some of the ways Bond reacts to Japanese culture and some of the way that Japanese culture is depicted. In Japan, men come first, women come second line is another infamous line from this movie. But I would also say that it's fairly respectful in a way of Japan. It portrays the country in a lovely way, and there's maybe a little bit of a box ticking exercise in terms of some of the things you might expect to see in Japan. They go to ryokans, they go to a sumo wrestling match, but they're also, it shows the country. I love Japan. I've been a number of times, and it's such a beautiful country, such a wonderful place to be. And this movie does kind of capture it without sneering at it or making fun of it or poking fun at it, for the most part. And and it's important, I think, to do that. This was a huge franchise. It obviously is a huge franchise still, but this was it's hard to, I think, really get across how big Bond was in the 60s. And so for Bond to do this, to go to Japan in the mid 60s and cast Japanese actors in major roles, as I said earlier on, was such a big thing and such a commendable thing.
And they also didn't dub Aki, which leading up to this, they dubbed the majority of the Bond girls. And just the fact she wasn't, I thought was pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mie Hama was dubbed.
Yeah.
Ultimately, but that is commendable as well. Not dubbing her, but not dubbing Aki.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pivot us over to a couple of dislikes maybe before we start looking at wrapping things up. And I want to bring up the Helga Brandt of it all, aka Fiona Volpe 2.0.
Yeah.
What were they thinking with this? I do not know why they wanted to copy her. I do not know. Also, what was up with that whole plane thing? But I have a lot of questions.
The plane thing I can forgive. I mean, there's a lot of rickety Bond villain attempts on Bond's life, so that's fine. But yeah, I don't have a real problem with the character of Helga Brandt. It's just the fact that following Fiona Volpe, who has more screen time and just more agency in what she is able to achieve throughout her, hour or whatever in Thunderball, this character just feels much slighter, doesn't have the impact. And I will say this, though, she dies well. The piranha death scene, which the actress actually did do herself, falling into that pond there, I thought was really effective. So I'm always down for a piranha death. But yeah, she's definitely no Fiona Volpe.
So she actually was killed by piranhas. She went full method and allowed herself to be eaten alive by piranhas.
That is also accurate. Yeah. Yeah. Breaking.
We're breaking the story. Yeah, we're breaking the story. Karin Dor was killed on the set of You Only Live Twice.
I respect that. I really respect that. Any actor who can really commit to their art in that way, fantastic. You wouldn't see that happening these days.
I couldn't see Daniel Craig doing it. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
No, he wouldn't be nibbled by a fish.
Sorry, the image just hit my head there. Chris, I think you've mentioned a few things, but anything else? Any quibbles about the film?
I mean, how do you quibble with a movie this perfect? apart from all the deeply problematic bits. Any quibble? The theme song's not one of my favorites.
That's interesting because people really do come down really strongly for that song. I'm actually in the same boat as you. I'm not a huge fan of the song, but people love it.
She was the last choice. They went through several people before Nancy was asked.
Yeah, they wanted Frank Sinatra. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, it might have worked a little bit better with him. But, yeah, it feels like it's become, I think, a little bit more iconic because the score is really, really good and the score is incorporated into the song. And genuinely, I think Robbie Williams' Millennium has helped popularize that song or that theme a little bit. But the song itself, I just find a little bit wishy-washy. Doesn't really stick in the mind, doesn't grab you the way that, because you're coming off the back of Goldfinger, which set the template for the Bond song, to the point where Bond songs are almost more famous than the Bond films. And Thunderball, I have problems with that film. I do not have problems with that song because, my God, Tom Jones nails it. And then you just have this, it's just a little bit drab and a little bit humdrum and it doesn't really go anywhere. But thankfully it's short, that's good. That's good. And in terms of other quibbles, apart from, I guess, say, some of the depictions of Japan and some of the depictions of Japanese culture, I think this is as solid a Bond film as you're likely to get. It's interesting in that it's slightly different from Goldfinger, which is basically a game of cat and mouse between Bond and the bad guy all the way through. And here it's a bit more of a mystery, a bit more, as you say, a bit more of a Dr. No, where he's not quite sure what's happening or who's behind it until the very, very end. But the scenes ultimately between Bond and Blofeld, solid stuff. I think one of you, I can't remember who was, said you maybe have problems with Connery's performance in this movie.
Yeah, that was Scott.
Is there a sense? Okay, so Scott, did you have a problem? Do you have a feeling that because it was Connery's last movie and he wasn't especially pleased to be there and he was being besieged by paparazzi and whatnot on set, that did you get a sense that maybe he's phoning it in a little bit? Is that one of your problems with that?
It was actually the other side of it. I always hear about this film that Connery looks bored and doesn't seem to want to be there, and because of all the problems you just mentioned, Chris. But for me, I feel like he's more just a guy doing his job. I don't smile when I go to work.
I try not to.
No. Who does?
I actively try and frown.
I want to let everyone know how miserable I am and how miserable they should be.
Damn straight.
Yeah, I think he's just a man doing his job. I don't see any problem with his performance. I think he's just channeling a guy who's done 5 films and he's well versed in the spy world. He's not beaming with a smile every time he walks into a room, but he never did.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I get the same sort of vibe here as I did in Thunderball from Connery, where he's really comfortable with the role. You don't have kind of that raw, kind of out of the box excitement you get in Dr. No and From Russia with Love, but he feels just very comfortable. I feel like we're kind of, though, on the precipice of tipping over into Diamonds Are Forever Connery, where he's just like strolling around the desert like a dad who's had a few too many in Vegas. Like, he, like here he's not there.
Yeah.
Like, we're just seeing him kind of edging up to that, but I think he's still committed to actually trying to pull this off in a convincing way.
Yeah.
And like physically, he's great. Like, you look at that fight, with The Rock's grandfather there, where he's like hitting him with a couch and moments like that. He seems genuinely invested in the action and making it look convincing, which is not the case with Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, I think he's very, very solid in this. Very solid indeed. And, Bond goes, the early days. I mean, the early days of Bond, Moore and Connery, and certainly Lazenby. These weren't films that were concerned with whether Bond had an arc or whether he was a different person at the end of the film, whether he learned any lessons or whether he became a changed man or discovered a soul. They were just adventures on which you happened to accompany Bond as he went around the world, kissing people and killing others. And perhaps there's a little element of that ennui creeping into Connery's performance here, but I don't really see it. I just see it as this just happens to be the latest James Bond adventure, and he's absolutely 100% solid in it, I think.
I'm curious, Chris, how do you feel in regards to the character? Would you like to see going forward more of these films driven by a Bond who doesn't need an arc, or have you really enjoyed the adding of the arcs to, the Craig era in particular?
No, I'm very much old school when it comes to Bond. And it's interesting. I can see why, as an actor, you would want to push against that. You would want to push against the idea that this is an essentially unchangeable character, or someone who will just stand firm and can't be buffeted by the winds of change in any way, shape, or form. And I admire that Craig went into it and wanted to do a 5-film arc, and the Bond at the end of No Time to Die is very different from the Bond we meet at the beginning of Casino Royale, and that's fine. And who knows, maybe Timothy Dalton might have done the same thing had he stuck around in the role and had circumstances conspired to allow him even a third Bond movie, and maybe we could have begun to discern an arc there as well. But I like standalone adventures, and I like you get enough of the serialized storytelling in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the DCEU, or even the Fast and Furious movies. You get all that, and I love the idea that each Bond film is connected. Obviously, and the events of one Bond movie can ripple into the next. So obviously, Bond gets married and on a Majesty's Secret Service, and that loss at the end of that movie does have a ripple effect on the Moore Bond and on the Dalton Bond, and even the Brosnan Bond indicates that there was something in his past. So it's all connected in that way. But I also like the idea that there are standalone adventures, and I think sometimes the desire in the Craig movies to make each movie personal, to make each mission personal, and to have Bond being affected and changed in some way got in the way of what were fairly simple and entertaining spy stories. And I want more of that. I want more Bond being a spy again.
Yeah, I like the idea that they were going for with World Is Not Enough, where you had a Bond who was injured. They didn't really play it to what they could have, but just the idea of having these mini arcs in a movie where Bond is going through some sort of personal journey, but we can tie it off by movie's end and then come up with something else the next movie versus the it's all connected theory.
Yeah. And again, that's not to denigrate in any way, shape, or form necessarily what Daniel Craig did. But I just grew up in the idea that these Bond movies were episodic. And maybe the fault lies with me. And maybe the fault lies with those movies. Maybe they should have tried to be a little bit more ambitious. And maybe if they had given Connery a bit more to do, he wouldn't have been so eager to pack it in after 5 movies. And even the Moore films, even For Your Eyes Only, does try and push against tradition a little bit, and does try and push against the formula a little bit. So you maybe even got a sense that Moore was getting a bit bored with it. Of course, the antidote to that theory is what happens next with A View to a Kill and Octopussy, which are as formulaic as they come.
Yeah. Speaking of other issues, we were talking about quibbles with the movie. One I have is when you look at the Bond films that happened previously, they're pretty state of the art. You can kind of throw rocks at the projection on the boat at the end of Thunderball. It's a little awkward. But here, I find there's certain shots in this movie that look really cheap. And I'm wondering if they just sunk so much money into the volcano that other aspects of the movie suffered, because there's a lot of driving shots where all of the projection is yellowed. It doesn't even look like it's happening. It looks old. It's they found sepia toned footage somewhere. And then, you look at that volcano erupting at the end. It's not the greatest looking. Like, there's a number of cheap shots.
Don't know what you mean. Looks great.
When I look at this movie, there's so many moments that are just stylistically really interesting. We've talked about Little Nellie. The sequence where you have the enemy choppers being revealed via shadow on the side of the mountain look amazing. But then they'll have a sequence where they're in a car and they just cut and it's like, oh, that looks awful. Like, it looks genuinely awful. And I can't really figure out why, because that wasn't as much of a problem in past Bond films.
See, I think that was a problem that plagued all the early Bond films, and even going into the Moore films, and they all have a problem with ramped up footage as well. Where they would ramp up the speed of the footage, and there's a moment in this where Bond is being driven through the streets of Tokyo, and they just for some reason they speed the footage up to try and engineer a sense of jeopardy. You don't need to do that. That's pointless, lads. Just leave it alone. It's totally fine. But shonky backdrops and bad rear projection are a staple of early Bonds, and I'm proud to see that tradition is upheld in You Only Live Twice.
Wait, are you saying you want less sped up footage in Thunderball? Is that what you're arguing for?
Oh, actually, no. I want Thunderball to be entirely on fast forward. Entirely on fast forward. If you could give me a 10-minute version of Thunderball, then I am happy. But you have to play the Tom Jones song in its entirety.
Sure.
If you cut out the underwater sequences, that's probably about 10 minutes left of the film, so that works.
Mm-hmm.
Spare me, Thunderball. I do need to revisit it. I'm slowly but surely getting to a point now where I'm able to contemplate revisiting some of the movies that the Bondathon put me off for life, or I thought that the Bondathon had put me off for life. So maybe I will go back and revisit Thunderball.
Oh.
My promise to you is that at some point in the next 10 years, I will revisit Thunderball.
I hope it doesn't feel like 10 years while you're watching it.
It's real time. How long are they down there? Jesus. Why are they underwater? Why are they all dressed alike? What's going on?
Why did it take him 10 minutes to take a net off of a plane? What is that?
Why have they remade this movie? Why did they remake this movie?
Almost twice. Almost twice.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
The only thing I had in terms of dislikes was a comment made by Tiger, and that is that Kissy has a pig face.
Whoa, Tiger, come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah, I mean, has anyone here seen Arrested Development?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so...
Yeah, all 3 seasons.
Thank you. That's all there ever was, ever will be of that show. Whenever I see that scene, I am always taken back to Anne, or Egg, or her.
Yes, her. Yeah.
And so in my notes, Kissy is referred to as her, with a question mark every time.
Yeah.
Right. So are you saying that Tiger is essentially the Michael Bluth of Japan's biggest spy organization, and he just cannot stand Kissy? And so there's another scene where he calls her Egg. That'd be quite nice.
Yeah.
That might let him off the hook a little bit.
I could get on board.
If it was just a weird Michael Bluth-esque character tick rather than him being horribly sexist.
Accidentally leaves her in Mexico.
Yeah, maybe he can incorporate many elements of the Bluth family. So, after Aki dies, he goes, "I've made a huge mistake," and he distracts Blofeld at the end, not with a throwing star, but by doing a chicken dance. I'd be absolutely on board for that.
Like Helga Brandt dies, and he's talking about should have left a note.
Yeah, or she gets killed by a loose seal. All these things. All these things are up for grabs in the remake.
So many balls in the air. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Scott, you referenced, the whole calling Kissy a pig. And look, Tiger Tanaka, really awesome character. I would happily watch in his own adventures, but he has some issues referring to the women who work for him as his personal property, things like that. It's oh, that's awkward. But it's interesting that we've done this review and we've said next to nothing about Kissy Suzuki, who is, I guess, the main Bond girl. I don't really know. She's the one that winds up, with him at the end. But do they ever even address her by name? I don't think so.
I don't remember.
Huh?
They They definitely never say Suzuki. If they say Kissy, it's maybe once.
Have you just cracked this film open accidentally?
I hate this film.
Yeah,
I hate this film.
That's it.
Yeah. The
Disavowed.
scales have fallen from my eyes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Disavowed, yeah.
Yeah, I never thought of that. I'm going to go back and check the tape. I don't know if they ever say Kissy. That's strange. But she is an afterthought in this film.
Yeah.
I think Roald Dahl had run out of ideas by this point. We always say with the Bond films, they can write one good female character and then not really anymore. Though No Time to Die might have changed that. But yeah, this is not breaking that mold.
Mm-hmm. I love that shot, though, where she's on the boat. And it's clearly a rear projection, but it's made to look like some sort of like heavenly background. That shot always gets a laugh out of me.
Shonky backdrops. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll throw it out to any final notes anyone has on the film before we wrap up. Chris, anything final, any tidbits, notes you picked up?
It's a good old fashioned Bond yarn, and we get to see Bond employing some spycraft, which is good. I don't like the fake out death at the beginning. I have questions about the logistics of that. So, is everyone in on it? Because you think it's got to be for show, right? So they've got to make it look convincing enough so they can run a story in the newspaper so that all Bond's enemies go, thank God, he's dead. All right, we can be doubly evil because we don't have to worry about Bond coming around and snooping around here with his terrible code name that everyone knows, and work of Universal Exports and the worst undercover spy in the history of the world. But if everyone in that opening isn't in on it, then what the hell's going on in there? So who are the guys who run in and machine gun the wall? And then later on, they come down, they pull down the bed. The doctor pulls down the bed, and he's like, oh, he died on the job. Well, at least he died happy, getting noshed off or whatever. I'm not entirely sure of the line. It's something like that. And they pull down the bed, and he's there, but there's no blood, which there would be because he's been riddled with machine gun bullets, a bit like Sonny Corleone. So what's going on there? Are those guys firing blanks? But if so, then how are there bullet impact holes in the bed? Is it a bulletproof bed? What's going on?
I think what you're doing here, Chris, is trying to apply logic to a Bond film.
This is my first mistake.
If Octopussy told us anything, it's that logic doesn't exist.
Many, many things. Yeah. And in fairness, also, I was earlier on today on the Empire No Time to Die spoiler special, I was bemoaning the lack of truly great stunt sequences in No Time to Die. And I think that this movie also has a lack of that big stunt. I mean, Bond hadn't really fallen into that trap by that point. Their idea of a big stunt at this point was to tit around underwater for 25 minutes. And, there's not... are there really great stunts in Goldfinger? From Rush with Love, the standout sequence in that is a fight on a train. So they hadn't really gotten into the car stunt in Man with the Golden Gun, or the parachute jump at the end of the opening sequence of The Spy Loved Me. So they hadn't really fallen down that rabbit hole yet. But having said that, for all that I do like the action in this, the final henchman fight or that fight with the Rock's grandfather, I did not know that. That blew my mind, by the way. Was his grandfather?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he
Wow.
died young. He died at the age of 45, so yeah.
That's blown my mind. That is extraordinary. So, there's really good action in this movie, as I said, but it does lack a big signature stunt, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I'm trying to think of when they really ramp up the stunts. It's got to be on Her Majesty's, right? Where you have like the bobsled fight. And I wonder how much of that was just having a 28-year-old Lazenby, where it's like, here's a really physical, athletic guy. Let's maybe push the envelope a little more. I mean, Connery at this point in the run, I don't think was like, guys, I want to jump off a cliff. Maybe he did. Maybe he did to want to escape the Bond films, but in terms of stunts, I don't think so.
Yeah, like no one's jumping on alligators in this one.
No, I mean, Karin gets the award for just taking the header into the piranha tank. Like that might be the biggest stunt.
God rest her soul.
Yeah, poor woman. Yeah,
died for her art.
That's right.
Cam, anything for you, Tippett?
Yeah. There's the one thing is we get the introduction. I guess. Well, I guess Grant in From Russia with Love is the first of like the the blonde Spectre agents who are Bond's, physical equals. Here we get like, is it Hans or Franz or something like that? The big blonde guy here.
No one knows.
Yeah, he's very generic, but he does set a template. We're going to get a lot of generic blonde henchmen going forward. This guy's sort of the originator of the generic blonde henchman. The fight is all right, although he looks pretty sad when he takes a punch and just rolls over Connery's back into the piranha tank.
Oh, do I have to? Oh God, because he knew what happened to Karin Dor, so he didn't want to do it. He was like, "Oh, come on! I've had such a good life."
Wait, is that Connery impression or the other guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell.
And it's, he did own those piranhas, I think, or he at least fed them. So you have a little bit of an emotional connection, like the Rancor keeper with the Rancor in Return of the Jedi. But unfortunately, Hans or Franz doesn't live to cry over his piranhas after the explosion of the volcano. The only other thing I'll note that was a shot that just kind of made me laugh, but in a good way, I actually really like the shot, is when, Bond goes down this slide into Tiger Tanaka's lair. And there's this like close up of Connery's face going down the slide. Clearly, Connery was not going down any slides, but it reminded me a lot of the Jimmy Stewart losing his mind in Vertigo shot. So I appreciated that. It actually, I liked it. It's a good wallpaper for your computer if you were so inclined.
I am not going down a fucking slide.
That'll be my new iPhone lock screen after this. Absolutely. Well, I think it's time we all hop aboard the Tiger train to the knock list. Now, as we have a guest this week, Cam, can you explain for Chris what the knock list is?
Yes, the knock list is a tortured acronym for Need to See Official Classics of the SpyHards podcast, where every week we vote for whether a movie belongs on the list of the all-timers as far as spy films go. So some movies that have made it on: 3 Days of the Condor, Goldfinger made it on, Dr. No, and From Russia with Love made it on as well.
Okay.
Thunderball did too, in a very contentious vote.
Come on.
I was against it. I got outvoted by the guest. I'm sorry.
I feel like I'm itching all over. Thunderball's been mentioned too much. It's too much.
But everyone gets a vote, and so we will see. Yeah, If You Only Live Twice makes the knock list.
Well, okay. This may prejudice the vote, but if this doesn't make it in, I will hunt you down and kill you both. Because, well, I don't know whether that's prejudice or not, but it's better than Dr. No.
Really?
It's better than Thunderball. Yeah, really. It's on a par easily with From Russia with Love and your beloved 3 Days of the Condor. So, if you vote against this film, it is a vote against it. Yes, it's problematic and occasionally racist, but it's also wonderfully inclusive and shows Japan in a new light. It has its cake and eats it. That's what I'm saying, basically. But it's so good. It's so good. Connery made 6 Bond films and 1 vaguely Bond film, and this is top 3 for me.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to ask you the question anyway, Chris. But it sounds like it's a yes. But is it making the list for you?
No.
Okay.
Strong no for me. I've listened to your arguments over the last hour or so, and I've realized that I've been living a lie when it comes to this movie. It doesn't have enough underwater scuba sequences that go on for a fucking eternity, and that counts against it ultimately. No, this is in for me. This is in. And I was really worried about this. I'll be honest with you. Revisiting this movie. Because nostalgia plays a big part in how we assess these things, and I grew up loving this film, and the last time I saw it was 15 years ago, and I can't remember anything after a certain point, and I may have blacked out, and I certainly had terrible diarrhea that day. That was not good, but I was worried that coming back to this movie, that knowing everything I know about it and how problematic it was going to be, and certainly those are not things we could excuse and set to one side at all. We have to deal with it, and as we're assessing the movie in its overall context, I was worried that the bloom would come off the rose a little bit with this movie for me, and to a little bit it has, to a little bit it has, but by and large, this holds up for me. This is, it's playing with the Bond formula, but when it hits the Bond formula, it hits it spot on. It's got some of the best images in the Bond film. It's got possibly the best bad guy introduction in the Bond film. It's got Connery, maybe because he knew he was going out, at his kind of most insouciant, swaggering, tough guy best. Yes, please. 2 votes, please. Can I vote twice? You only vote twice?
No. No. Well, that's a yes, by the sounds of it. What about you, Cam?
For me, this one is a no. I enjoy this movie. Like, the thing is, a lot of good movies have not made the knock list. Like, movies we genuinely enjoyed. Like,
name 3. Name 3.
Okay.
Name 3 films.
The Bourne Identity, Men in Black, and what was the other one? Tomorrow Never Dies. You look at stricken with horror.
Cam, what is your criteria for getting into the knock list? Is it just is it just how you feel on the day? Is it just completely random? Is it a roll the dice, a toss of the coin? What has the Bourne Identity done to you?
Bourne Supremacy made it in. So for us, it was
okay,
just
you're fine. Carry on.
Yeah. We felt like that was the pinnacle of the Bourne franchise. Bourne Identity is very good. Yeah. It just doesn't quite hit the high mark for what I look for in that franchise. And that's kind of how I feel here, where I do enjoy You Only Live Twice. It's just, to me, like the first one that feels creaky. And I know we've gone back and forth about whether Thunderball is creaky. And I guess I just come down on the side of like, this is the dividing line for me, where we get a little more of the creakiness. But it has iconic stuff. You've got some very memorable locations, some really memorable characters. Just doesn't quite hold together for me as strongly as I'd like. And I think Lewis Gilbert takes this formula and does it better in Spy Who Loved Me.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
This doesn't happen very often. This does not happen very often.
I can see where this is going. That's fine. That's fine. Now, thanks for inviting me on your podcast, guys. It's been really, really fun. Really fun. This personal attack on me that's lasted an hour or so. It's been lovely.
Okay, so we have a yes and a no, and I actually get to cast a deciding vote for once. I feel an immense sense of pressure.
What is your Venmo address? How open to bribes are you?
You can find my t-shirts on redbubble.com/SpyHards.
Adding to basket.
Okay, this is how I break it down. I enjoyed this film more than Thunderball.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my problem, because Thunderball ended up on the knock list. I was outvoted on Thunderball.
Yeah.
And a part of me wants to outvote Cam as a spite to put this on the list because Thunderball made it on.
Honestly, this is the most suspenseful thing I've ever been part of. I cannot tell where you're going with this. I can't tell whether you're about to go, I want to vote yes just to spite Cam,
Sure.
but I'm not gonna. Or whether you're gonna go, no. I don't know what you're gonna do. Are you gonna crush my dreams?
Chris? I'm not going to crush your dreams.
Oh
my god. Oh my god. Oh my god, this is huge.
This film, if you played this to a newbie to the Bond franchise, and this is what the knock list is, it's meant to be a list of films you can put in front of a newbie and go, these are the best spy films. If you put Thunderball in front of someone, I think a lot of people might die.
That's fair. That's fair.
They will jump in the piranha tank from boredom. Yep. Okay? Although they might develop a water aversion from watching the film. I don't know.
Yes, never mind Jaws. Watch Thunderball, and you will never go swimming again.
That's a missing tagline for that film. But I have more fun with You Only Live Twice. Yes, it's got some questionable things with the turning of Japanese. But if you contextualize that and you remade this film now, they wouldn't do that, of course. But a lot of this film would remain intact. I think it's still a fun romp. Mm-hmm. I think it's Connery doing maybe not his best, but if Goldfinger and Thunderball made it in for Connery's performances, then I think this is just about as good as they were. So ultimately, I'm going to say yes.
I mean, I can totally understand this, especially when you've got things like the volcano lair, the reveal of Blofeld. Like, there's a lot of iconic franchise elements here that I think, even if you don't necessarily dig the whole movie, they're very important. And yeah, I can totally understand why you would want to put this on the knock list.
Excellent backtracking there, Cam.
Thank you. That's what I do.
Admire it. Cracky bit of vehicle reverse in there. So well done.
We inducted our man Flint because of its effect on like films, because of what it meant to films. So if that can get in, I think this can too.
I mean, I using that criteria, just any film will get on the knock list. It's just
Men in Black International didn't make it on. You'll be pleased to know. So. Okay.
But it should get on the knock list because it's just a film, and it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and that's what our man Flint has.
Hearing our podcast deconstructed by a guy who actually reviews films for a living is really nice.
Yeah.
I feel deeply fulfilled about my hobby and passion now.
Listen. I introduced a segment to the Empire podcast during the pandemic called the 3-fact structure, and we haven't played it on the show. It's wildly controversial. It's divided our audience completely down the middle, and we did a live show a few weeks ago in London, and Jason Isaacs was our guest, and he came on and he played the 3-fact structure with us, and he pointed out, he eviscerated the concept of the 3-fact structure live in front of loads of people watching it on live stream, and loads of people in the audience, and we haven't played it since because it's basically a segment in which I ask my colleagues to come up with a fact, and it's not themed, and the only criteria is that I have to not have heard of it before, and that's a bit arbitrary and a bit spurious because I could just say that I've never heard it before, or that I have heard it before. I could just lie. So there's no real rhyme or reason or structure to it. And so that was pulled apart from me by Jason Isaacs. So I know your pain. I know your pain when you haven't thought something through.
Well, this was the last episode of SpyHards, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
It will not live twice.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
You glad I stuck around to the end now?
Yeah. So glad. Well,
when I'm available to come back, I'll do more Bonds. But just yes to all of them.
Yeah, we've already got your vote. Why bother?
I'm a yes. I'm in. Any film. Is it in focus? Yes, then it's in. I'm good.
I stand by my no vote. Damn it.
Okay. Well, there's 1 no and 2 yeses, and as such, You Only Live Twice is finding its second life on the knock list. Usually I thank the guest for joining us at this point, but I don't think I will.
It's been a real pleasure. It's been very, very. It's been entertaining. You guys have had fun.
Yeah,
I can see I can see from your faces you've had fun.
I've got a box of tissues near me to cry afterwards. So, but Chris, should our listeners want somewhere to go after this? Now our podcast has ended. Where can people find you?
Well, this is basically my grand plan. Any podcast that I guest on, I end that podcast. And so therefore the audience, they're kind of disembodied at that point and they have to find somewhere to dock. And the Empire podcast is the place to come. So we're out every Friday. We have a regular podcast out every Friday. And it's basically just a group of people sitting around talking about films, but in a hopefully fun and entertaining and irreverent way. And we have great guests every single week. And if you like spoiler special discussions, we also have a subscriber-only spoiler special channel, which I can heartily recommend. But then again, I wouldn't I? So that's where you can find me every week, and I'm on Twitter as @Chris Hewitt.
And the No Time to Die special will be for subscribers, right? So that's something people may want to check out who like this podcast.
That is correct. And we're doing a couple of spoiler specials for No Time to Die. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Today's recording was 2.5 hours, and I expect next week's to be just as long because there's a lot of it's a complicated film. There's a lot of varying opinions on it, a lot of dissenting voices, and so which is good because sometimes if you've got 4 people in a room and they all love the film, then it can get a little bit dull. So it's good that we're all arguing with each other, as we have here tonight, guys. So this is a good thing. It's a good thing that we have disagreed.
Well,
right.
I can't thank you enough for jumping on, Chris, despite my ego being completely destroyed and obliterated at this point. We've had Helen O'Hara on already, and she was really nice, so we'll probably have her back.
Hey, whoa, come on, hey, I'm nice people, all right, you fuckers. I'm nice people. How dare you insinuate I'm not nice people?
Well,
I've never been so insulted in my life. I am available to do more.
But yeah, we're slowly assembling our Infinity Gauntlet of Empire hosts.
Yeah.
I don't know what stone you are. You can pick.
I am the reality stone because I have brought a dose of reality to this podcast, and I've woken you guys up. I told you. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I wake people up.
Well, there
to
you
the
go.
knock list. Oh no, I love it. I love it. I love the idea. I love the idea of the knock list. I I think what happened was I felt threatened and I lashed out.
Been there.
I have that effect on people. Don't worry, it's fine. But yeah, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, Cam, the question is, what are we doing next week?
Well, Scott, we've been tackling giant volcanoes and Blofeld and larger-than-life circumstances. We're going to go stripped down. We're going back to the 70s, baby, to hang out with Warren Beatty in Alan J. Pakula's The Parallax View.
We loved talking about 3 Days of the Condor, and this is the film that immediately came up when we mentioned that episode to people. So we've had requests for this film for quite some time. I'm glad we're finally getting around to it. I've never seen it, but you tell me good things.
Yeah, it's one that if you look up like reviews of the time were kind of middle of the road, but it's over time really gained a massive following and has become one that people really look to as one of the pinnacles of 70s spy films. So I'm excited to revisit it for myself.
Well, there you go, folks. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to check out The Parallax View and join us next week. We are, of course, a proud member of Quite the Thing and Podpree podcast networks, which you can find out more about them on their websites. And of course, the knock list, which was deconstructed today, thankfully, by our guest, Chris, can be found on letterboxd.com/SpyHards. And finally, don't forget to follow us discreetly at SpyHards, that's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, no, this is business.